Hey, Typology, before we jump in, I want to remind you that Ian's new book, The Fix, is now available everywhere fine books are sold. We've been talking about it a lot lately on the show, but I really want to encourage you to pick up a copy. Ian walks us through the process of using the 12 steps to reconnect with ourselves, with God, and with others. This book is for everyone, and I know you're going to love it. Hey, folks, and welcome to Typology, the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure, all through the lens of the Enneagram. We have a great guest and something we don't get that often when we're talking about types, an Enneagram 7, and I'll go ahead and spill the beans, a 1-to-1 7, and oftentimes that 1-to-1 7 looks a lot like a 4. We don't have a lot of 1-to-1s. When I say 1-to-1, I mean the subtype. You know, there are 3 subtypes: social, 1-to-1, and self-pres. So our friend Justin Heap, he comes on today. He is an Enneagram 7. He is an entrepreneur, creative consultant, and a certified Enneagram coach, author, and associate pastor. His latest book is By and By and Never, Poetry and Art. And then he has another book that will be releasing sometime this year, but that's the latest one that is out. But we have a really rich conversation around the Enneagram 7, who is 1-to-1, that looks very much like, or can look very much like a 4, and different from the stereotypical 7. So this could shed a lot of light for some of you that are trying to figure out what type you are, or if you know someone who's wrestling with, am I a 7? Am I a 4? This might be the perfect episode for them. So glad you're here, folks. That's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And now, here is the man of the hour, Ian Cron.
Okay, Typology Tribe, let's welcome our new friend, Enneagram 7, Enneagram certified coach, creative consultant, among many other things, Justin Heap. Welcome to Typology.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here, and thanks so much for the invitation, Ian. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. All right, so Enneagram 7s. I have a son who is a 7.
Ooh.
It's interesting. I don't have many. I have a couple of close friends who are 7s, but not as many as I do of other types.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously they're known for their adventurous spirit, their love of possibility, but also their avoidance of pain and discomfort, right? Of distress. And even though, here's my experience, even though 7s appear lighthearted and spontaneous sometimes, there is a really deep inner world beneath the surface of 7s that I think some people don't actually see, oftentimes because some 7s aren't very good at letting others see it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go there for a moment. Just talk to me about the 7-scape, the interior world of the 7.
Yeah, I like how you're starting with the places that I avoid. So that's great. I joke because one of the most recent revelations for me, especially as I turn the lens inward on myself, is as I have moved towards sobriety and spent a lot more time in the 5 space, I'm reminded of how much the 7s that I know, at least, and certainly for myself, really do value the emotional landscape, if you will. We really, really do. It's the most obvious thing, of course, but it's just that at a very young age, we learn to cope with our pain through the avoidance of all those things. But it's not that we weren't feeling them. I find through many, many years of therapy now that I really struggled so much because I really did want to sit in that space. And it was just very uncomfortable and very painful and in my family traumatic. And so, of course, then we're an escape kind of artist, right? And so that's our main kind of out. And so for me, I think the 7 landscape is adventurous. It's so much fun. And it was even more fun when I was younger, if that maybe is valid.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe that's true for your son, or you're watching him move through life. But I was much more of the social, really extroverted, super wild kind of a guy. And certainly through life, maybe through marriage and parenting and all the different things, but have kind of come full circle. And I've really now brought a lot of that calm and stillness into the 7 space. So for me, that can still look like lots of ideas. In my professional work, it's recognizing all the patterns and wanting so much to push the boundaries and push the envelope. And so that makes up a lot of my world. And yet there's still a strong temptation, I would say, a strong temptation to avoid really going deep, even in the smallest of ways. So often I'll make a joke before, well, I did it here when I opened. I'll make a joke about the pain before going into that space, and oftentimes I catch myself and I'm like, yeah, okay, so I did that, and I'll come back to center. So it is true, though I do think it can shift and evolve a lot over time, and the reality is I actually I'm moved quite often by some pain and the empathy and the compassionate side of life. So it's a really strange balance. At some point in the future, we might you and I on this call might jump into why I have a strange fascination with the 4 space, which kind of ties into that. So, anyways. That's a little thing.
Let's go back. You used a very interesting word just a minute ago. You used the word sobriety. In what context did you use that word?
Of sobriety of mind. And so not becoming so inebriated by all of the things that I can just get my hands on or my life experience with. I find it so good for 7s to learn about and to push into. And that can mirror sobriety in other contexts in that, sometimes it means not engaging with or indulging or allowing myself to have all of these different experiences. And so for me, practices like mindfulness and contemplation and stillness have become really, really valid, super difficult many years ago, still tricky for me to really, allow myself the space. But many years ago, it was really, really, really difficult. And I think that's because, it's just like anything that I can do to avoid. But again, 7s are just notorious, right, for avoiding by way often of like, just give me all of the other things. So
it's interesting. You triggered something in me that I just realized, in my conversation with 7s have a lot of nostalgia around childhood, around early childhood, being little kids. And they often talk about, oh man, when I was little, they'll be in their 50s and they'll be talking about childhood. What's up with that?
That's a really great question and not untrue. That checks out. I find that a lot of it is tied to the surprise and delight that I find 7s almost embody more than many other types, or at least are quicker to embody. Surprise and delight, and it's kind of the adventurous kind of spirit, right? And I have found it to be true of 7s that childhood nostalgia, as you mentioned, it's this fuel. Like everything is sort of playful and new things can happen and it's all imagination and big ideas. All of those things I think are tied often, at least, to that childhood spirit. So I think there's something there. I also believe, again, no surprise, especially to folks probably listening in here, but it strikes me that 7 sort of hold this fear very closely around those childhood wounds. So, so tell me if this is true, because I'd be curious to know from your experience, kind of much more than even I have. When talking with 7s, they do talk about the childhood. They're almost always quick to talk about it through rose-colored glasses, and almost every time it's like a really sad story. It's like super traumatic. And like in my family, in my own life, my father left multiple times, for example, and I grew up most of my childhood kind of without my father. But when I tell the story, I was like, but like we played catch and stuff, and he taught me how to grill, and then and they're like, yeah, okay, but can we go back to like, wait, so your dad left like multiple times, So there's this bizarre juxtaposition around the beauty of imagination and the wildness that honestly embodies like all of hope for me. I am such an optimistic, hopeful person. And the reality is, again, though born in childhood, was really probably also just on the other side of some really dark, painful times.
Mm. There's this idea of the puer aeternus, right? Which is the eternal child. And the archetype for that is Peter Pan. And sometimes what the 7 gets trapped in is the word innocence, from which we get the word innocence, where there's the avoidance of what is called the necessary wound. And the necessary wound is what everybody has to experience to make the passage from childhood to adulthood. And if you don't fully pass through the wound, then you won't achieve the depth and an adult spiritual center, right? And sometimes 7s that bypass the wound, they bypass it or they wallpaper it over.
Yeah.
They get pegged as being shallow in adulthood, like just, kind of like never wanting to grow up.
Yeah.
So what is the wound? It sounds like you've been in therapy, you're an Enneagram coach and all that stuff. What is the wound in you that drove you out of innocence towards becoming a person of depth? And is that true of you?
That's really insightful. Yes, I think in short, the answer is yes. And I have found a really unique correlation to 7s by way of their fear, that I find most of the time we experience fear as, of course, in the present, as we do all emotions, but being directed towards the future, as opposed to, for example, say anger, which I find is often rooted in the past, and this message like, I will not be hurt by that again, and therefore I'm so angry about something that happened in the past. And for context, shame being rooted really in the present, and this idea of like, I'm not worthy of something that's happened to me. And so I'm not worthy to carry this. I'm not enough or something. And fear, on the other hand, is future oriented, is oftentimes future oriented. And it's this idea of like, I'm so afraid of what I cannot be sure about. I'm just terrified at this unknown. And I think for me, that really was that necessary wound that you mentioned. Really beautiful language, super problematic for people who are probably trying to avoid that. But it's the right language. And so for me, I moved, 20 or 30 times in my childhood, and child of verbal abuse and parents with alcoholism and drug use and so on. And so what that created was not someone who was angry, or even someone, quite frankly, who felt a lot of shame. I was just very, very afraid. And specifically when I have parents that were leaving, and again, this just definitely through years of therapy, and even in this last year, my wife and I are seeing a EFT therapist for the first time this year, and we'll be married 23 years. And anyway, and through that experience, literally while recounting some of my childhood, had again a revelation of almost that wound. I was so afraid at the future that was very, very unclear.
So let me just actually push on to you about something for a minute, and maybe challenge your terms, because I think terminology is important. So, or precision with language is important. So I think fear is actually about the present. So fear is what you feel in the present moment when you are faced with a clear and present danger. Right. So it's right here. It's right now. I am afraid. But when you talk about the future, you're talking about anxiety.
Right.
And there's a nuanced difference between the two, right? Like fear is something that, without fear,
sure,
you're dead. You'd be dead on the Serengeti 10,000 years ago if you didn't have fear, right? And fear will tend to activate the fight or flight response, right? To help you survive real threats, right? But anxiety comes from your brain anticipating threats that may never happen. And I find that to be true of 5, 6s, and 7s. We talk about 5, 6s, and 7s as being in the fear triad. And sometimes I wonder if it shouldn't be called the anxiety triad, because it is, even though, those types are, 7s are very future oriented, 6 is a little bit more present oriented, and a little bit future. It's a little tortured there. And, 5s are more past oriented. And that is ignoring subtypes.
Sure.
So that then it gets down to another layer of distinction, but we'll just say in general. So I think that it's important to sort of delineate between fear and anxiety, with types. You're right that I would say, and I think I even wrote about this in the Road Back to You, I think I used the word anxiety for 7s. It's just like, I think about my son. My son is quite anxious, but you would not know it to look at him. He looks so fun, so together, so socially confident, so extroverted, so he's shiny. Anthony, am I right? Like he is
100%.
shiny,
yeah,
right? But under it there's just a lot of anxiety, right? Even he would say, he's on a recovery journey. That I have been given complete permission to say that, and a lot of what drove his need for substances was the anxiety, I think. The constant anxiety. What is that like for you?
That is still tied to fear. I maybe want to even nuance a third layer down. And in that, I mean, I have found that if I stay in a place of anxiety, I will be afraid. And
you're talking about the felt experience.
Yes, the felt experience, exactly. And so like if I remain in this place of anxiety, whether I name it or not, I actually will be creating a future in which I am very much afraid. And sometimes not always for, valid reasons, as you've said. And so yes, fear is there's someone in my house and I need to be afraid to respond. And anxiety is I'm afraid someone's going to be in my house, but they're not. And all of that. But if I do work myself up into in this way, in this very particular unraveling, then I often end up in that space. And so, of course, they're closely related and all the rest. And so for me, what I will say is that I do often, it's harder for me to name anxiety, that's for sure. I'm almost more comfortable with it being named fear. So maybe that's even where some of this comes in. And so I could probably, dive into even why that is. But I do find that, here's an example of how I've even named that for myself. There's a hidden layer of anxiety in this. I often find that I want to be wanted, but I don't want to be needed. And it's like, because then all of a sudden, then there's action involved and there's commitment and that taps into all the 7s, like kind of just don't lock me down and pigeonhole me and, all the things. So a real, again, maybe a fear of freedom, maybe fear is not the right word, or a fear of a loss of freedom, excuse me. And again, maybe that's not the best language, but it is felt that way. As you said, that's a really great way to put it. And so I think for myself and other 7s, I know that anxiety is often the first thing that we want to mask, we definitely don't want to deal with that. So I find that to be, yes, that feels very true. Yeah.
So going back to something also you said earlier, you have this kind of 4 envy.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm assuming a social 4, right? Like sort of the archetypal 4 that people think of when they're
exactly.
Okay. Why would a 7 want to be a 4?
Okay. So I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because it started with typology. Okay. And I could go back and listen. I can't remember the exact person. I probably have it in my notes somewhere, but it started while listening to a typology podcast years ago now. And it was, yes, a very kind of stereotypical, almost a caricature, which I generally reject, but like that, just the epitome of a 4. And as I was listening to it, here was the thing. Every single thing that they were describing was exactly what I wanted to be feeling. And that sent me down a very weird path where I don't know if I'm assuming you do know, but maybe you do not know. Chuck DeGroat, does that name ring a bell? You know this guy?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so Chuck lives in our town here, and we've grabbed coffee many times, and Chuck is just the sort of person who you just want to like learn things by way of osmosis, right? You're like, just be near me and I want your wisdom. And I've sort of joked with him. I'm like, what is this bizarre fascination that I have with, like, if I could just be a 4? And as time has went on and I've studied more and, moved through the Enneagram world and coaching and so on, I really think that it is a combination of experience around trying multiple things, if not everything. Although, of course, it comes from a different motivational space. But like we both tend to share a bizarre capacity and a bizarre desire to try absolutely everything. Of course, sevens are just often trying it by way of avoiding everything else. And so like, I'll just try all of the stuff. It all seems fun. And of course, fours are typically, or at least that particular social four, is really trying to try everything in search of, this one thing that I will never become. And so we're sort of coming at it from two different angles, but the felt experience is often very similar. And the second piece is, it's probably picking up a little bit of the healthy 5 space that sevens, kind of travel to, but it's this gravity. And it's the ability to sit in that emotional space. That's really what it is. It's almost like it's this light that is illuminating that necessary wound that you mentioned in this darkness, and you're like, oh, like if I could be some other version of myself that would look with sobriety and clarity and wonder and like really know and know it in its truest, most realist sense, I feel like that's who would do it. And so there's this like calling almost. And I have a couple of friends who are fours, and we usually have like very normal conversations. And if we're sitting around and having whiskey or whatever, we're sitting there and we talking for an hour, and all of a sudden they're like, "Are you okay?" And you're like, I just love you so much right now. Like it's just like you're my person, So there's this strange, fascinating relationship. I think the 7 and 4s, and not sometimes maybe a lookalike, again, mostly around all of the variety of things and passions, but it's really this more internal, interior, mystical sort of landscape.
As you know, I believe the Enneagram is one of the most powerful tools for developing self-awareness. But to gain the benefits, you need to know your type. Taking an Enneagram assessment is the first step toward understanding yourself and the people around you. It offers insights that can enhance your self-awareness, personal growth, emotional intelligence, your relationships. It's not just a one-time test, it's a lifelong tool that will help you navigate life with more clarity, purpose, and empathy. And now, when you take my new Typology Institute Enneagram assessment, you'll receive a research-backed, comprehensive report that's easy to understand. Not only will you learn your dominant Enneagram type, but you'll also gain insight into aspects of the Enneagram most other assessments don't cover, such as your dominant wing, subtype, orientation to time, and even stances. Get your results today at typologyinstitute.com/assessment. What's your subtype? Are you a 1-to-1 7?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yep.
So explain to people what that particular subtype is like of the 7.
So for me, it is often that I value strong relationships, of course, and very specific. And that doesn't even always have to be, friendship relationships, but even professional relationships. So for me, when I have someone come in my, into my work radar, if you will, they're really a person or a client or a group that I'm connecting with. They will get the best of me. They will get the most of me. They will get everything that I have, all of my attention, all of my creative effort. And the same goes for my family and my partner. And so for me, that 1-to-1 relationship, in contrast to, more of the social and self-preservation types, I just so strongly value the bond and the relationship that we have, and not always in a kind of a type 2 sense, but it very much in a devoted, I want to maintain this relationship, probably mostly out of fear again. And for me, a fear of even losing that relationship. And so, and then just not knowing, and again, maybe that's more anxiety, but for me, yes, strong relationship oriented, yeah, and again, not always even, it's usually 1-to-1, but I love me a good small group.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I'm always hesitant about typing people famous people from afar, but it's not unuseful. Like there's a part of that actually is a little useful. And it's hard for me to know because I think this guy also struggled with some mental health issues that could cloud the Enneagram a little bit. But I always think of Steve Jobs as a 1-to-1 7, who probably though had some obsessive compulsive personality disorder stuff going on. So again, this is all based on me reading Walter Isaacson's book about Steve Jobs, right? Great read. Now, the 1-to-1 7, I say that because I think about Jobs like going to India and like studying meditation and dropping acid and there's a kind of a draw to mysticism with 1-to-1 sevens that I find really fascinating. Like we think about the more lighthearted social or self-preservation sevens, and the 1-to-1 or sexual 7, it's more about intensity than it is about lightheartedness.
Yes. And for me, that's right. Like you will have all of who I am for a described period of time or even in a season, quite frankly. And it's so funny you say that. So I'm checking all of the 7 1-to-1 boxes right now, but Soul Making by Alan Jones, it's a phenomenal read. I highly recommend it. And I've been reading this for years and years, but it started my path towards, lo and behold, mysticism. And, St. Francis, like if there were to be a space that I feel most quote unquote at home with, even within the Christian world, the vast, diverse world of Christianity, it would most likely be, in Francis. And so, and again, for all of those reasons, it's mystical, it's intense, it's grounded, it's rooted. You can sort of give all of everything that you have to this idea and to this concept. And so, at any rate, no surprise.
The other thing about that subtype is they don't just want excitement; they want to feel alive. And when you think about Francis, I wrote a book about Francis years ago. That was my very first book, and there's a quintessential 7, like that probably with a little bit of some kind of bipolarish thing going on at the same time, but definitely had that 7 thing. That 1-to-1 7, as you said, this is basically true of many. This subtype, this deep intensity of relationship. Like, what is your partner's type?
She's a 6.
Yeah. Okay. And then that desire for stimulation. Like, have you been to India?
No, my correlation would be Africa, probably, which I've traveled to, but yes.
Yeah. I think part of the reason that 7s would be attracted to India is that it is a complete sensory overload. Like it's the aromas in the air of food and people. It's the sounds. It's the music is harmonically so different from our music. The food, the colors are overwhelming. The noise, it's just like stimulation central, And I think the 7s I know who've been to India come back, they're like, my favorite place, man. It's like India. It's intense, So that's good to know. I'm glad you are. I was, as you were talking, I was like, yeah, he kind of smells like a 1-to-1 7 versus a social or self-pres, which is what most people think of. The 1-to-1 7's a little bit of a different brand, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And really wonderful, I think my son is a 1-to-1 7. And honestly, he's very fascinated with 4s. And sometimes we have thought he's a self-pres 4. Because self-pres 4s, they look like 7s sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. And that it goes back to that. That was almost the exact conversation I had with Chuck around that. There is a lookalike, definitely getting into subtypes, but it very much can be that way. And I'm still doing some work in that whole space. And when I'm coaching, I have a 4, not a self-pres. And some of the conversations I have, I even got to catch myself because I'm trying to I'm curious about their life and where they're headed. Sometimes for an ulterior motive of like, is this me? But it's really, really fascinating.
So, what role does faith or spirituality play in the life of a 7?
It plays probably an antagonistic role in a sense. for me.
Tell me more. I love that.
Yeah, it's very, apophatic in nature. It's like
you're going to have to tell people what apophatic.
Yeah,
you're going to have to tell them what apophatic means.
So cataphatic just meaning everything present, and so those things that we might focus on or participate in and with, that is literally present around us. The words, the music, the space that we have. They're things that are embodied and so on. And apophatic is really the removal, not the act of removing, but the absence of. And so it is the mirror to all of those things. And so for the mystics, it was the complete silence, for example. And that's where they really believed that you could, be closest or near to God and so on. And so for me, the role of spirituality and faith, I did not grow up in a church experience, did not grow up with a religious background, and still found myself questioning sort of the higher being, and I was mostly angry. So it started with this frustration around sort of my broken family. That was the beginning for me, and just this sort of existential why. Why is my family like this when I just don't know? Like, what did I do? What did I do to have to be kind of experiencing this pain? And then as it developed and moved through your 20s, I was introduced to Jesus and really kind of was enamored, if I'm really honest. I fell in love with that humanness. I loved everything that Jesus stood for and did and how he lived his life. And so then I went to school and studied and became, I was in youth ministry and then was a teaching pastor. And that was the path, of course, and probably many people listening, you're like move through your 20s and 30s and you're like, does the church look like Jesus? Like there's you come face to face with that conflict at whatever point in our lives that many of us do. And it was then that I really probably began searching anew. And for me, it was faith and spirituality represented this antagonism of, if this is what you say it is, then I naturally am going to question all of it. Like whatever it is that you define the thing as, I really will push up against this thing. And of course, the beauty is that you're still in relationship with spirituality and faith. I mean, that's the whole point. It's like I'm pushing against this thing or this being, and all language gets messy, and I can answer any questions specifically. But you're like, but I'm still in relationship with all of this, and so that really kept me tethered, maybe. And so no surprise, I love all questions. I am a very curious person. And value so much curiosity and compassion and connectedness for all of those reasons. But for me, it really is born out of a desire to know what is real, and so that has pushed me into systems thinking, of which I had studied now 5 or 6 years ago, and then and now I'm spending a lot of my time writing and interviewing other folks about the consciousness and collective consciousness and, the mind and all of the different things. So for me, it has included all of that, no surprise, along with that mystical sort of flavor.
Yeah. There's that 1 to 1-7 thing. And not only, this is where you can kind of look like a 4. Like sometimes one of the things I've learned, like, Mo, this is true, right? Like if you've been around the Enneagram long enough and you've been through enough typing interviews with people and you've just been around it, right? A long time. You begin to spot nuances. And what's interesting to me, like I was with a guy the other day. All right. And to an untrained eye, you would think he was a 4, just observing him. Untrained eye. And he was, I can't even begin to, he was in his probably 70s. He had long hair in a pigtail, pulled back. He was wearing like, almost like 60s looking clothes. But it looked like clothes that would draw attention to him. You know what I mean? Like he was wearing like, I don't know, like something like the size of a dream catcher around his neck. You know what I mean? Like, and he's got like earrings and he's like got really wild glasses, and he just was, You stood out.
Yeah.
And people would say, oh, he must be a 4. I was like, nope, that dude's a 7.
Yeah.
And I was right.
Yeah.
Right. He was a 1-to-1 7. Right. And he's got like, I don't know what kind of chakra stuff going on. And, just like he was all into this mystical, esoteric world thing. And part of it is, I think it's just the fascination with the adventure of that, like of this other world. And they can be magical thinkers. And that can be really good. And it can be really dangerous because one of the problems for 1-to-1 7s is they're very suggestible. So if you wanted to like start a cult,
right,
go after 1-to-1 7s.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're like,
yes,
oh, a guru. They love a good guru.
Yes, indeed.
Right. And whether that's Ken Wilber or, or Jesus or whoever your person, or St. Francis, they love a guru who kind of embodies this otherness that they want. And it seems, oh my gosh, it's so fascinating. And the ideas are so intoxicating.
Yes.
And their way of being is so fascinating. And so that's, and then they have kind of a gluttony response. Like, give me more of that.
Yes.
Give me more of that. And so I think with that 7-4 thing, sometimes people can look at a 7 and think that's very 4-ish. And I'm like, no, that's 1-to-1 7-ish is what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've even built into my own life part of my examine, if you will, or daily examine, my daily practice, ending my days very specifically, is really even recounting the day and asking myself, did the material that I took in, because for me, it's very exactly as you said, like reading whatever authors, all the ideas are so good. That's all true. I have lots of quotes, and it's like Nick Milo, note making, and I love all a good person, knowledge management system and all the stuff. So when I get to the end of the day, I ask, is the material that I'm taking in and or the people that I connected with actually helping to improve my life and keep me grounded? Because otherwise it's very conceptual, and I love a good concept as much as the next 7, like I love it. But at the end of the day, you're like, I need something to really keep me grounded here now. And I find myself, and for those maybe listening, for me, that's a great, healthy practice of like it's a very 5-ish thing to do. I just like, let me drill down and recount my day, because otherwise I would never do that. It would absolutely not be in my purview to like review these things. And so I really force myself is probably the wrong word, but I set myself up to walk into that 5 space and say, let me review my day. And of all of the ideas that I took in, man, what is the thing that is worthy of being noticed and is going to help me remain grounded? And honestly, this is even reminding me, like, anytime that I found myself out of my depth or in trouble in terms of like relationship or immaturity wise, or with my partner, whatever the case is, it is usually related to me getting lost kind of right in the clouds, so to speak. It is usually that space of just becoming so untethered and disconnected from what is really happening. So for me, it's like, let's just bring it back down. And it's good to spend time there, and it influences like me when I'm on the ground. But I really do need to make sure that I'm building scaffolding to stay there and come back.
Yeah. And I love that you have a practice that is about presence, because that, of course, is one of the things that makes up the profile of sobriety, which is, of course, the virtue that you are trying to move toward from gluttony to sobriety. And I think the other piece of that is that doing a nightly examine is wonderful. Most people think that I get up in the morning and I read and I journal and stuff like that, and they don't do anything at the end of the day. And actually, the end of the day inventories, like in a 12-step program, the 10th step, right? Continue to take personal inventory, right? And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it, right? And so that 10th and 11th step space where you're like at night, you sit down and you're taught in those programs, sit down at night and you ask yourself, was I dishonest? Is there a secret I'm keeping that I need to tell someone about immediately? Did I hurt anybody today with whom I need to make amends tomorrow? Yeah. It's just that grounding, that's a grounding exercise. And I think that's really, really, like, it'd be really healthy for sevens who are listening to consider an end of day inventory. And it can just be simply sitting down for 5 minutes with a journal and asking yourself some good questions about the day.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's a couple things I have in my head. One is, and a lot of Eastern thought, the end of the day is actually the beginning of the next day. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And I just wanted to make an observation as I was watching you earlier, Justin. You were talking about a lot of your processes, and you were like, a lot of them were really kind of, to me, sounded like things in the mind. And as soon as you said, I need grounding, you put your hand over your chest, like over your heart.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to me that you kind of long for this fourness. And when you put your hand over your heart, I just was like, yeah, it's interesting. I love that you're doing exercises. It feels like you're trying to get to your heart. When we talk about being grounded, is that one of the things that you're saying when you say that this helps me be grounded? Like, what does that mean to you when you're grounded?
That's a really beautiful observation. I think in so many ways, yes. I also would, the thing that comes to mind even immediately is that I've become almost obsessed with this idea of presence. And I've written about it in various forms and in some podcasts and stuff. And through those experiences and processing, I think that presence is intimately tied to being grounded and intimately tied to a heart-filled, open, curious sort of way of life. And that is absolutely the motivation of so much of what I do and what I want to do and what I want to be passing on to my children. And so I think that, yes, it is at least that. And it is also this like more about, well, and I even think of like meditation, for example. This would be the best way I can even say it. Like, most of the time people think that the goal of meditation is silence or stillness. And really the goal is present, it's like be present. It is often through silence and so on, because again, we need that like apophatic way. But the same would be true. Like, yes, I want to be grounded, but even more than being grounded, I want to be present, which is another way I think of saying that we can't be certainly, kind of lost in the future or lost in the past and still be present. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay. So I am a 28-year-old seven. I'm listening to this podcast and I want you to coach me and tell me what the work is for me.
The work at 28 is probably a lot of not working. And by that, I would say the work at 28, and I'm putting myself back here, 26 very specifically for me, is how do you genuinely listen well? Sevens love to talk. They're typically very good communicators, or the life of a party. And so the work at 28 is truly, maybe even tying it back into this idea of being present, but it is truly about listening and becoming a student and becoming a learner, and not always the teacher. And for sevens, that can be really, really challenging because so much of the adventure and so much of the imagination is about going out and doing the things. It's very creative. I'm a very Renaissance person. I embody so much of I make up words like polymentalist. That's the way that I speak about myself because I have such a hard time telling people all of the things I like to do. And it's just then you're just back in a circle. And so for young, mid to late 20s, 30s, they're probably just at that point where they're starting to realize this is, my resume is very, very long, or I'm creative and I do 25 different things, whatever the case is. And they've been trying so hard to communicate with anyone who's willing to listen about all the things that they're passionate about and they believe and they do and all of this stuff. And at 28, 30, man, you got to turn that off. And I would say spend some significant time with practices, embodied practices, maybe find a close friend who can even check you but can help you to talk significantly less and listen significantly more.
I love that. Justin, this has been rich, man.
Yeah.
I've loved this conversation. So how do people learn more about what you're up to and all your coaching and all the good stuff you're doing?
Yeah, if they want to know what a polymentalist is, hey, you can find me online at justinpheap.co. That's JustinPheap.co. And I'm on all of the socials with the same tag essentially as well, justinpheap.co. And I write on Medium and do some other stuff online, but doing a quick search there is the best way to get a hold of me. And I think the invitation I'd really love to leave is just, I love to connect with other people. That's the truth. I love to see what you're making. If you're an artist or a musician, I would love to see it and hear it. So yeah, thanks.
I love that. Anthony and I were laughing just because before you went on, because we had gone to your website and I was like, that is a Sevens website, man.
Yeah.
Look at the list of things he does.
It's a mess. Good night.
Just look at the list of the things he does. And I was thinking about how, oftentimes sevens are generalists, and this is kind of what makes them great, because they just have this capacity to see overlapping patterns and ideas, complicated ones.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no wonder, we didn't even get into integral theory and all that stuff, but which would just be seven heaven, and 5e heaven too.
Yeah.
And so rich and good. And man, I just appreciate you helping us understand the sevenscape.
I love it. Love it so much.
Anthony, I love you so much, buddy.
You too, man. It's been a good one.
What a good day, man. What a good day we've had. And for all of you who are listening, may you have love, may you have joy, may you have peace, may you have healing, may you have rest. Until next time, see ya.